The suitcases were already by the front door when I walked into the kitchen that Tuesday morning, my coffee mug trembling slightly in my hands as I took in the sight of my stepfamily's excited chatter about their upcoming trip to Italy. Bryce, my stepson, was scrolling through his phone showing pictures of the Amalfi Coast to his sister Kinsley, while my husband Garrett finished zipping up his leather travel bag with that satisfied smile he always wore when he was about to do something that excluded me entirely. The smell of fresh coffee couldn't mask the bitter taste already forming in my mouth as I realized what was happening. "Oh, you're up early, Delia," Garrett said without looking at me, his tone carrying that dismissive edge I'd grown to recognize over the past 3 years of marriage. "Good thing, actually. We need to go over a few things before we leave for the airport." The way he said, "we," made it crystal clear that I wasn't part of that equation, and my stomach dropped as I watched Kinsley fold what looked like expensive new clothes into her pristine white suitcase. I'd been wondering why they'd all been so secretive about their weekend plans, why the conversation stopped whenever I entered a room, why Garrett had been taking hushed phone calls in his study. "Italy?" I managed to ask, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. "When did you decide on Italy?" The silence that followed felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. Bryce looked up from his phone with that same smirk his father wore, the one that made me feel like I was some kind of joke they were all in on. "Mom's been planning this family trip for months," he said, emphasizing the word family in a way that made my skin crawl. "You know, for people who actually contribute to this household." Contribute? The word came out as barely a whisper, but the rage building in my chest made my hands shake as I set down my coffee mug with more force than necessary. "I've been contributing to this house for 3 years, Bryce. I cook your meals, I clean up after you, I pay half the mortgage on a house that apparently isn't even mine." My voice was getting stronger now, fueled by months of swallowed insults and years of being treated like hired help in my own home. Garrett finally looked up from his luggage, his gray eyes cold as winter steel. "Let's not be dramatic, Delia," he said in that patronizing tone that made me want to scream. "You knew when we got married that this was primarily my children's home. Your financial contribution is appreciated, but let's be honest about what it really amounts to." He gestured around the kitchen with its granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. Things I'd helped pay for, things I'd chosen and arranged and maintained. "This trip is expensive, and frankly, we didn't think you'd want to come anyway. You're always complaining about not having enough money for your own things." That's when Kinsley chimed in with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Besides, someone needs to stay here and take care of the house while we're gone. Think of it as your contribution." She zipped up her designer suitcase with a flourish, and I noticed she was wearing the diamond earrings I'd given her for her birthday last year, earrings I'd saved for months to afford. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was wearing my gift while telling me I was basically their unpaid housekeeper. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out to see a text from my sister Marlo. "Coffee later? I have news that might interest you about property law." The timing felt like providence, like the universe was giving me a sign. Marlo was the one person who'd always seen through Garrett's charming facade, the one who'd warned me about marrying into his ready-made family. She was also a paralegal who knew more about legal rights than anyone I'd ever met. "Actually, you know what?" I said, my voice finding a strength I didn't know I still possessed. "I think I will take some time to myself while you're gone. Maybe I'll finally look into a few things I've been putting off." The way Garrett's eyes narrowed told me he caught the subtle threat in my tone, but before he could respond, Bryce dropped his phone with a clatter that made us all jump. "Oh, come on, Delia," Bryce said, his voice dripping with that entitled arrogance that reminded me so much of his father. "Don't be such a drama queen. We're just taking a family vacation. You act like we're abandoning you or something." He picked up his phone and started scrolling again, as if my feelings were nothing more than an inconvenience to his morning routine. Besides, it's not like you have anywhere else to go anyway. This is your home now, remember? The casual cruelty of that statement hit me like a physical blow. This is your home now. As if I was some charity case they'd taken in out of the goodness of their hearts, not a woman who'd been paying half the mortgage and all the utilities for 3 years. Not someone who'd given up her own apartment, her own space, her own independence to build a life with a man who apparently saw me as nothing more than a convenient roommate with benefits. Actually, I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest, I think I need to remind you all of something. My name is on the deed to this house. I'm not some guest who can be dismissed when it's convenient. The silence that followed was deafening. Garrett's face went pale, then flushed red, and I could see the muscle in his jaw twitching the way it always did when he was about to lose his temper. "That's just paperwork, Delia," he said. But there was something different in his voice now, something that sounded almost like fear. "You know how these things work. It's complicated." Complicated? Everything was always complicated when it came to my rights, my contributions, my place in this family. But it was never complicated when they needed my money, my labor, my silent acceptance of their treatment. Kinsley's laugh was sharper now, more brittle. "God, you're really going to make this about legal stuff? How pathetic. We're trying to have a nice family trip, and you're threatening us with lawyers or whatever." She grabbed her suitcase handle with such force that her knuckles went white. "This is exactly why we didn't invite you. You make everything so difficult." 2 hours later, I watched from the living room window as their Uber pulled away from the curb, taking my so-called family to the airport for their 10-day Italian adventure. The house felt different already, like I could finally breathe without walking on eggshells. My hands were still shaking from our final exchange at the door when Garrett had leaned in close and whispered, "Don't do anything stupid while we're gone, Delia. Remember who you're dealing with here." The threat in his voice had been unmistakable, but so had the fear underneath it. For the first time in 3 years, I'd seen Garrett truly rattled, and it gave me a strange sense of power I'd forgotten I could feel. I pulled out my phone and called Marlo, my fingers fumbling slightly as I dialed her number. "Delia?" Her voice was warm and concerned, the way only a sister's voice can be. "I was hoping you'd call. I've been doing some research since I texted you this morning, and honey, I think you need to hear what I've found out." We agreed to meet at the coffee shop on Maple Street, the one where we used to spend hours talking when we were younger, before I'd gotten caught up in Garrett's world of conditional love and financial manipulation. 30 minutes later, I was sitting across from Marlo in a corner booth, watching her spread out papers like she was preparing for battle. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore the same determined expression she'd had as a kid when she was about to prove a point. "Okay, sis," she said, sliding a document across the table. "Tell me about your mortgage situation. Specifically, tell me about what you signed when you moved in with Garrett." As I explained the financial arrangements, how I'd paid half of everything, how my name was on the deed, how I'd contributed to renovations and improvements, Marlo's expression grew more and more serious. She took notes in her precise handwriting, occasionally stopping to ask clarifying questions that made me realize just how much I'd been taken advantage of. "Delia," she said finally, looking up from her notes with eyes that blazed with righteous anger, "do you understand what you're telling me? You're not just a girlfriend who moved in. You're not even just a wife with some financial interest. You're a legal co-owner of that property with the same rights as Garrett." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "That means you have every right to change the locks, to decide who lives there, to make decisions about the property. He's been gaslighting you into thinking you're powerless, but legally speaking, you hold all the cards." The drive home from the coffee shop felt like the longest and shortest 20 minutes of my life. Marlo's words kept echoing in my head. "You hold all the cards." For 3 years, I'd been living like I was a guest in my own home, tiptoeing around people who treated me like an inconvenience at best and a burden at worst. But now, with legal documents in my purse and my sister's fierce support behind me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: actual power over my own life. I sat in my car in the driveway for a full 10 minutes, staring at the house that had never truly felt like mine until this moment. The white colonial with its perfectly manicured lawn and expensive landscaping I'd helped design and pay for, looked different now. It didn't look like Garrett's house where I was allowed to stay. It looked like my house, where I got to decide who was welcome. The first call I made was to Morrison's locksmith. "I need my locks changed today," I told the gruff voice on the other end. "All of them. Front door, back door, garage. Can you do it this afternoon?" When he quoted me the price, I didn't even hesitate. This was the best money I'd ever spent. While I waited for the locksmith, I walked through every room of the house with new eyes. In the master bedroom, I opened Garrett's dresser drawers and started pulling out his clothes. The expensive suits, the silk ties, the designer shirts, all of it went into garbage bags. 3 years of being told I was selfish, ungrateful, dramatic, and difficult. 3 years of being excluded from family decisions, family trips, family life. 3 years of paying for a home where I was treated like hired help. Kinsley's room was next. I carefully folded her clothes, even the ones I'd bought her, and placed them in her suitcases. The makeup I'd given her for Christmas, the books I'd recommended, the jewelry I'd saved up to buy for her birthday. All of it went into neat piles. I wasn't going to destroy their belongings or throw them away like trash. I was going to treat them with more respect than they'd ever shown me. The locksmith arrived at 3 o'clock, a weathered man in his 50s who didn't ask questions about why a woman needed to change every lock in her house while her family was away. He just did the work, handed me the new keys, and wished me luck. "Whatever's going on, ma'am," he said as he packed up his tools. "I hope it works out for you." By the time the sun started setting on day 8 of their Italian vacation, I had transformed the house into something that finally felt like mine. The bags and suitcases were lined up neatly on the front porch, covered with a tarp I'd bought to protect them from the weather. I'd even included a cooler with water bottles and snacks, because despite everything they'd put me through, I wasn't cruel. I was just done. The hardest part had been Bryce's room. Looking at his childhood photos, his sports trophies, his college acceptance letters, I'd felt a pang of genuine sadness. There had been moments over the past 3 years when I thought we might actually build something like a relationship. Times when he'd asked for my help with homework, or when we'd laughed at the same stupid movie. But those moments had been overshadowed by his casual cruelty, his assumption that I was nothing more than his father's temporary girlfriend who happened to pay bills. I'd spent the last 2 days preparing for this confrontation, rehearsing what I would say, how I would stand, what I would do if they tried to intimidate me. Marlowe had given me the number of a lawyer friend who specialized in property disputes, and I had her business card in my back pocket like a talisman. I'd also done something I'd never done before. I'd told my neighbors what was happening. Mrs. Chen from next door had been horrified when I explained the situation. 3 years of this treatment?" she'd said, shaking her head in disgust. "Honey, I've been watching from my kitchen window, and I always wondered why they talk to you like that. I'm glad you're finally standing up for yourself." She'd promised to keep an eye out for when they returned, and I knew she wasn't the only neighbor who'd been watching the dysfunction play out in our driveway over the years. The call came at 7:30 on Thursday evening. Garrett's voice was tight with barely controlled fury. "Delia, what the hell is going on? I can't get into my own house." His own house. Even now, even after everything, he couldn't acknowledge that it was our house, that I had equal rights to the property we'd bought together. "The locks have been changed," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "Your belongings are on the front porch. I've made sure everything is properly protected from the weather." There was a long silence, and I could hear Kinsley's voice in the background, shrill with indignation. "You can't do this," Garrett said finally. "This is my home. These are my children. You have no right to lock us out." But his voice lacked the confident authority it usually carried. He sounded rattled, uncertain, maybe even a little afraid. "Actually," I said, "I have every right." 20 minutes later, I heard the screech of tires in the driveway, followed by car doors slamming with enough force to rattle windows. Through the living room curtains, I watched Garrett storm up to the front door with Kinsley and Bryce close behind, their faces twisted with rage and disbelief. The sight of their luggage lined up on the porch seemed to hit them like a physical blow. Kinsley actually stumbled backward, her mouth falling open in shock. Garrett pounded on the door hard enough that I worried he might damage it. "Delia! Open this door right now! This is insane!" His voice carried across the neighborhood, and I could see curtains twitching in windows as our drama became public entertainment. Mrs. Chen appeared on her front porch with a cup of tea, positioning herself like she planned to stay for the whole show. I took a deep breath and opened the door, keeping the security chain in place. Through the narrow gap, I could see Garrett's face, red with fury, and something that looked almost like panic. "You need to leave," I said quietly. "All of you. This is no longer your home." "Are you out of your mind?" Kinsley shrieked, pushing past her father to get closer to the door. "You can't just kick us out of our own house. This is where I grew up. My stuff is in there." She was wearing the same designer jacket she'd packed for Italy, the one that cost more than I spent on groceries in 2 months, and her entitlement was radiating off her in waves. "Your stuff is right there," I said, nodding toward the carefully arranged bags and suitcases. "I made sure everything was packed properly. Nothing's damaged or missing." The reasonableness of my tone seemed to infuriate them even more, like they'd expected me to be hysterical or emotional, giving them ammunition to paint me as the unstable one. Bryce kicked one of the suitcases, sending it tumbling off the porch steps. "This is such bullshit," he yelled. "You can't just steal our house. Dad, call the cops or something." But even as he said it, I could see the uncertainty creeping into his expression. He was starting to realize that this wasn't just some emotional breakdown they could wait out. "Actually," came a voice from the sidewalk, "she's well within her rights." We all turned to see Mr. Hoffman from across the street, a retired attorney who'd been watching the confrontation unfold. He walked over with the confident stride of someone who knew exactly what he was talking about. "If her name's on the deed as a co-owner, she has every legal right to change the locks and determine occupancy. You folks might want to consider finding alternative accommodations for tonight." The look on Garrett's face when Mr. Hoffman spoke was something I'll never forget, a mixture of rage, humiliation, and dawning comprehension that his carefully constructed power structure was crumbling in front of the entire neighborhood. He tried to recover quickly, puffing up his chest and adopting the authoritative tone he used in business meetings. "Now listen here. This is a private family matter, and I don't appreciate neighbors interfering in things they don't understand." But Mr. Hoffman wasn't intimidated. "Oh, I understand perfectly," he said, adjusting his glasses with the patient air of someone who'd dealt with bullies in courtrooms for 40 years. "I've watched this young lady work in your yard, maintain your property, and contribute to your household for 3 years. I've also seen how you and your children treat her. Frankly, I'm surprised it took her this long to stand up for herself." That's when Mrs. Chen decided to join the conversation, walking over with her teacup still in hand. "We've all seen it, Garrett," she said, her voice carrying the weight of years of witnessed cruelty. "The way you talk to her in the driveway, the way your children dismiss her, the way you exclude her from family activities. This neighborhood has eyes, and we use them." I watched Garrett's face cycle through emotions: anger, embarrassment, calculation. He was a man used to controlling narratives, managing impressions, keeping his private life private. Having his treatment of me exposed in front of people whose opinions he valued was clearly devastating to his carefully maintained image. "This is ridiculous," Kinsley interjected, her voice hitting a pitch that probably hurt dogs' ears. "She's just the stepmother. She doesn't get to kick out the real family." But even as she said it, I could see the doubt creeping into her expression. The presence of witnesses, the neighbor's legal confirmation, the reality of standing on a porch with their suitcases. It was all starting to sink in. "Actually," I said, opening the door wider but keeping my position firmly in the doorway, "I'm not just the stepmother. I'm a co-owner of this property who's been financially and emotionally abused for 3 years. And I'm done." My voice was steady, clear, carrying across the gathering crowd of neighbors who'd come out to see what the commotion was about. Bryce looked like he was about to cry, which almost broke my resolve until I remembered his casual cruelty that morning they left. "But where are we supposed to go?" he asked, his voice smaller now, less arrogant. "This is our home." "You should have thought about that," I replied, "before you told me I was just a leech living off you." The silence that followed my words was deafening. I could see the exact moment when the reality of their situation hit all 3 of them. Garrett's shoulders sagged, Kinsley's defiant posture crumbled, and Bryce actually took a step backward, like my words had physically pushed him. For 3 years, they'd operated under the assumption that I would always be there to absorb their cruelty, to pay my share and ask for nothing in return, to accept whatever scraps of respect they felt like throwing my way. "You can't be serious," Garrett said finally, but his voice had lost all its authority. He sounded like a man who'd just realized he'd been playing poker with someone who'd been holding all the aces. "Delia, let's be reasonable here. We can work this out. We're family." "Family?" The word came out as a laugh that surprised even me with its bitterness. Family doesn't exclude each other from vacations while calling them leashes. Family doesn't dismiss someone's contributions while taking their money. Family doesn't threaten people in their own homes. I felt tears prick at my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of relief, of 3 years of suppressed anger finally finding its voice. Mrs. Patterson from 2 houses down had joined our little audience, and she shook her head in disgust. "Garrett Morrison, I've known you for 15 years, and I've never been more disappointed in anyone in my life. That girl has been nothing but kind to your children, and this is how you repay her?" Kinsley tried one last desperate play. "Fine, we'll call our lawyer. You can't just steal half our house." But her threat fell flat when Mr. Hoffman chuckled and shook his head. "Young lady, your stepmother didn't steal anything. She exercised her legal rights as a property owner. If anything, you've been living in her house rent-free while treating her like hired help. Any lawyer worth their degree will tell your father the same thing I'm telling you now. Find somewhere else to sleep tonight." I watched Garrett pull out his phone, probably calling his brother or maybe a hotel, his face a mask of humiliation and defeat. Kinsley was crying now, ugly sobs that might have moved me if I hadn't spent 3 years watching her casually destroy my self-worth with her words. Bryce was loading suitcases into their rental car with mechanical movements, like he was in shock. "For what it's worth," I called out as they prepared to leave. "I hope Italy was worth it." 6 months later, I'm sitting in my kitchen, in my house, sipping coffee and watching the sunrise through windows I finally got to choose curtains for. The divorce was finalized last month, and Garrett's attempts to claim more than his legal share of the property failed spectacularly when Marlowe's lawyer friend presented 3 years' worth of financial records showing my contributions. Turns out keeping meticulous records of every mortgage payment, utility bill, and home improvement expense was the best investment I ever made. The house feels completely different now. I've redecorated with colors I actually like instead of the beige and gray palette Garrett preferred. I've planted a garden in the backyard, something he never let me do because it might decrease property value. I've turned Kinsley's old room into an art studio where I'm finally pursuing the painting hobby I'd abandoned when I got married. The space breathes now, like it's finally free to be what it was meant to be. Mrs. Chen brought me homemade cookies yesterday and told me how proud she was of me for standing up for myself. "You look 10 years younger," she said, and she was right. I'd forgotten what it felt like to wake up without that knot of anxiety in my stomach, wondering what criticism or dismissal would be waiting for me at breakfast. I'd forgotten what it felt like to make decisions about my own life without having to justify them to people who saw me as a convenient target for their frustrations. Garrett found an apartment across town and has been surprisingly cooperative about the divorce proceedings, probably because his lawyer explained exactly how badly he'd overplayed his hand. Kinsley is living with her mother now, and Bryce moved in with friends near his college. I haven't heard from any of them directly, though I know through neighborhood gossip that they've been telling people I went crazy and stole their family home. Let them tell whatever story helps them sleep at night. I know the truth, and more importantly, so does everyone who witnessed that confrontation on my front porch. The best part is how people treat me now. Not just my neighbors, but everyone who knew us as a family. They look me in the eye when they talk to me. They ask for my opinion. They treat me like a person whose thoughts and feelings matter. It's amazing how much respect you command when you finally start respecting yourself. Sometimes I think about that morning when they left for Italy, how powerless and small I felt watching them pack their expensive clothes for a trip I wasn't invited on. How different would my life be if I just accepted it? If I'd spent those 10 days cleaning their house and waiting for them to come home so I could resume my role as their unpaid servant. Now tell me, what would you do if you were in my place? Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and comment where you're watching from.